Hi, welcome to everybody to panel number 10, where we ask, has Downstream fully embraced digital? My name is Patrick Bangert. I'm the VP for AI at Samsung SDS, and I co-chair the Society for Petroleum Engineers Digital Energy Technical section, where you will find lots of information related to this. We have a very excellent panel prepared for you today, four excellent experts on the area. And I'd like to ask you, Mattu, Deanna, Shri, and Ben, in that order, to introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Matt Hager. I'm the Vice President for Digital Manufacturing in BP. Essentially, I look after all of the legacy IT estate and new product development for our refining and terminals businesses.
Deanna?
I'm an investment banker leading the energy technology practice for Tudor, Pickering, Holt, which means I spend time with clients in the energy technology space, helping them with M&A and raising capital. In energy tech, I think Industry 4.0, digitalization, IoT are all huge topics for moving the energy industry forward. And I think the downstream sector in particular is interesting because it probably has the most overlap with other heavy equipment industries like chemicals or manufacturing. So thanks to the Downstream conference organizers for inviting me here today, and I'm excited for the conversation ahead.
Shri?
Hi, my name is Sri Mattu. I'm an engineering lead at Suncor Energy refineries at Sarnia. Basically, my role is expansion to supporting all the engineering in the front end side, whether it's a capital or expense or a replacement in kind. And I've been in the industry for the last 10 years in the oil and gas. And it's my pleasure to be here, and I appreciate Future Downstream giving me this opportunity to share my knowledge with the rest of the audience here. Thank you.
And I guess that makes me the odd one. I'm Ben Randell. I've never actually worked in the downstream segment. My career's been in upstream, predominantly in wells, but I probably had some interaction, maybe sending some non-ideal fluids or some flow assurance issues into a downstream situation. So I apologize for that. I'm currently Chevron's product line manager for wells assurance. Prior to that role, I was the upstream digital advisor for our Americas. Before that, I held several roles in engineering and rig site positions. And a real highlight has been standing up our real-time decision support center, where I was the ops superintendent. And that, for me, in 2014, where I really saw the power of digital and the power of data. You collect a kind of data. I think we agree that we don't always use it, and so seeing that for me was a real great step. And I'm hoping that through digital we can get people away from the manual, the arduous, the painful activities that we all take for granted, perhaps in our careers, and engineer happiness to where we have people working on things that they enjoy, things that they're good at, that undoubtedly add value to the bottom line. So grateful to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for introducing yourselves. And with that, let's jump into the value that digital can provide to the downstream industry. So Shri, what are the benefits of digital in downstream versus other industries?
Well, it's an interesting journey. If you look, oil and gas since 2014 seen a tremendous change in the landscape of our business. And digital journey is kind of pushed in, and we were never an early adopter. Look into the technology curve. If you look, technology has come and matured, and we always observed from the distance. We never adopted digital into our journey. But I think the change in the landscape of the oil prices and the pandemic actually accelerated that push of the digital journey. So for my perspective, I think digital journey is an enabler. It is not an option anymore. It brings the people closer to do the work at that closest point to give something in the real time. So if you look from the risk perspective, the process and health and safety are the primary concern. So the digital journey has given the data to suggest that we can reduce almost 13% in accident and injuries. And also the digital journey is so important because traditionally, if you look at a situation from the time you detect a problem, analyze a problem, and act on it. And if you look into a chart of hierarchy versus response time, it took longer times before we could make any decision. With the digital, now what we are doing is bringing that data upfront to the front-end workers or front-end people who can see the information, what's happening, and they can make the decision themselves. They don't need to escalate that risk because, it's not anymore you're carrying a wrench and a screwdriver, right? So you're making that decision. You have an information on your hand. So the digital journey has enabled or actually accelerated how we do our business. It's adding to the bottom line. And it is the biggest aspect into this journey is also traditionally we are known to have the silo functions. The data are fragmented. You'll see a process data with somebody, reliability data with somebody, and an inspection data with somebody, and engineering data somebody. So now the digital journey is allowing us to collaborate all of that data in integrated one central depository that will allow us to look at the information in a very succinct manner. So the decision process can be made easy and available. And some of the things, there are a lot of low-hanging fruits in the digital journey that people don't have to have a fancy thing. Some of the low-hanging digital journey has been 3D modeling. And most of the plants, have these paper drawings. And the as-built drawings are not up to date. So having a 3D scan of the entire plant can add a huge value chain improvements to the digital journey. And we have seen that connection to the digital 3D availability made the planning easy, made the engineering easy, made the construction. It added a huge value to the construction, whether you bringing in a large crane for a critical lift, or whether you are inspecting a flare tip. You can use a drone. You don't need a huge crane standing there and waiting. There is a huge cost benefit of bringing the digital journey into the landscape of oil and gas. And also we have seen that training of the operators. You can simulate now. You can bring in a simulation, and you can bring the simulation into the operational learning skill that will allow the people to improve the skill. So the digital journey is, I think it is given. It is an enabler for the oil and gas, and especially for the downstream. And it has accelerated our decision-making process. It is helping the people to have the information in their fingertips. And it's a way to go, in my opinion. Thank you.
Excellent. That was a really good overview of lots of the benefits. In order to reap the benefits, of course, these things have to be deployed. So Ben, how are the leadership teams in the upstream industry dealing with the digital transition and enabling it?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I can speak for our leadership team who've been committed to digital for several years now, with a really marked uptick in 2018 when our new CEO came on seat, Mike Worth. So we have tremendous support from the top, from our C-suite, from our senior leaders, and we're seeing it merge and meet up with this grassroots kind of interest and passion, and quite frankly, probably a higher knowledge from our frontline workers, our newer employees, those coming out of college, coming to join the industry. And so our leadership find themselves in possibly an uncomfortable situation where they don't necessarily have as much experience, at least in that traditional sense, as the folks working for them. And so it could be uncomfortable, like I said, but they're rising to the challenge. They're exhibiting a growth mindset. they're understanding what their employees know that maybe they don't know, because a lot of these younger employees don't know a life without digital, right? That's what they've grown up with. That is normal to them. And so, it's ubiquitous, I believe, across. You asked me about upstream, but nothing I'm saying here is unique to upstream. It would apply equally to midstream, downstream, any heavy industry, or probably any industry. So at Chevron, we talk about this concept of a know-it-all leader versus a learning leader, and hopefully it's obvious which one of those is desirable and which one is not. But it's this vulnerability of willing to be a learning leader, to say, I don't know everything, especially in this digital space. My employees do, and I'm willing to keep learning from them. So leadership know our business, but they don't necessarily understand the digital technologies. The younger, the newer workforce are the opposite, don't know all the intricacies of the business, but they've grown up with this technology. And so when they are confronted with a challenge or a problem, they approach it with a different perspective, with a different lens. And so these learning leaders take that on board, all in service really of improving the experience for our stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, not just shareholders and customers, but employees, the environment, our regulators, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how our leaders are embracing it, and credit to them, because as I said earlier, it can be uncomfortable, it can be a little difficult, but the change is here, and recognizing the competencies and the opportunities that the younger workforce can bring, that's how our leaders are going to embrace this and make the most of digital transformation.
Thank you. And looking from the perspective of hopefully being or becoming a learning leader, I'd like to ask Matt, what are some of the top 1 or 2 lessons that you learned as a learning leader from the digital transformation?
Yeah. I guess I'll maybe a quick nod to Ben there on the C-suite support. That it certainly is something that does help the journey tremendously. But I guess there's probably 2 other things that I would point out, neither of them technical in nature, if you will. So the first of those, I think, is around customer centricity. Any of the digital solutions that we've seen and deployed, and almost in all cases, they introduce some amount of difficult business change. The technology, in kind of relative terms, is easy to develop, but the change and the implementation challenge there is really very hard. We spent a significant amount of time with AWS, who's one of our key partners here, in understanding the way that they've approached their business, and their kind of number one measure on anything that they do is customer delight. So if their focus is, if we delight the customer, then the solution will be successful. And so it might sound pretty trite or simple, but designing with the customer in mind, and as much as possible involving the customer, the end user, in the digital development, is really a kind of a key success for us. Having somebody at the ground level pulling on the other end of the rope is a heck of a lot easier than just trying to push it from the center. The other thing I would reference is really a very deliberate and consistent and constant focus around value. So knowing the value of a solution before you start, and understanding how you're going to measure that value is really, really, really critically important. We get, I think in many of our businesses, we'll probably have quite a plethora of engineering type folks who get really excited about the technology, and it's relatively easy to get lots of things started on technical solutions, and you end up with being in a bit of a POC purgatory, where you've got things competing with one another in a relatively congested space, and none of them really have a good kind of keen understanding on, well, what have we developed this thing for? So to avoid the state where you end up with a lot of solutions in search of problems, I think it's critical to understand both the value of the product that you're looking at, as well as a real definitive way in how you're going to objectively measure that value, and use that as a real key threshold or gatekeeping device to be critical about what are the things that you want to be moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Having been in POC purgatory myself, it's really a terrible state. So if you design for the customer and keep the value in mind, I think that's a tremendous thing to do to move forward. Now, Deanna, I'm so happy to have an investor on the panel. It's a rarity. We'd love to learn from you. Where do the investors see the value of digital in the downstream sector?
Yeah, and I guess maybe a point of clarification too. I'm not actually an investor, but I do work with a lot of investors, so I do get some insight into kind of the thought process around this. I think a lot of it boils down to the cost reduction part of the equation. So generating more cash flow is a huge focus right now, not just for downstream, but the entire energy industry. So generating more cash and also with greater consistency, I think, is driving a lot of this focus on operational efficiency. And so just like what Matt was saying on focusing on the value, focusing on being able to measure the value and demonstrate the value, I think any improvement that you make in the investors' minds has to kind of trickle down to the financials in some sort of way. And so I think there's a really obvious case to make for digital in enabling that. Digital means taking more measurements and collecting more data and being more precise in your in the operations of a process and can even lead to process control. So I think there's a really strong case to be made there. And I think for investors, it's an easy argument to make, but whether or not that manifests itself in the end and actually can improve financials, that's something that I think we'll have to be convinced by practice, by time, and by execution. I think in refining, in downstream in general, a lot of this process control, a lot of this IoT, how these are implemented can have a really big difference on the bottom line. So, for example, if you're separating a product, in a lot of cases in downstream, wasted product means tens of millions of dollars, even more sometimes, and so it can have a really big impact on the bottom line and on the financials. And I think investors recognize that. I think there's also a liability management side of the equation. Predictive maintenance, reducing mean time to failure. Or even just formalizing maintenance schedules in general, just putting that somewhere digital where more people can access it. I think that a lot of that can make a big difference in reducing the rate of incidents and reducing the costs associated with these incidents. And then I think another part of it is kind of the transparency slash visibility side of the equation, being able to allow more employees and more people within the organization to see kind of what the plant is doing. I think also reduces the liability side, but then also for documenting and for auditing purposes, I think it's going to become more and more important. Especially as I think energy transition plays a bigger role in downstream. How do you kind of calculate your carbon footprint as a refiner? All of that takes data, and it means data that's taken more regularly and with more consistency. And I think somebody mentioned connecting with the consumer earlier. I think that's going to be more important. So all of that is going to take a lot more digitalization, and investors, I think, recognize that and recognize the value of digitalization and playing a role in that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a tremendous, good lesson to know, is that we have to, at the end of the day, watch the bottom line. And of course, we all know in the digital journey, the beginning, the digitization step is an investment that costs money, and it's the analysis of the data later on that brings the value. So it's a kind of down and then up approach. And of course, all this needs to be organized. And what Matt was saying, we have to keep the value to the customer in mind. Ben, how has the upstream sector applied an agile approach to drive the digital strategies?
Yeah, so the upstream is historically been built on major capital projects where tremendously high investment and then many years of returns and earnings, hopefully. And I think my understanding of downstream, obviously, it follows a very similar model. And so, of course, initially we took that approach to everything, and it served us well when we're managing risk. It's not such a powerful approach when we're trying to do a digital strategy. And so, when the world is fairly stable, maybe you get away with it. In a world that is changing faster than ever, and I love this quote where, the world has never changed this quickly before, and it'll never change this slowly again. That's the future we're facing, and that's where the Agile approach has so much to offer. So we've been working the past few years at Chevron to transform our decision-making methodology, really balance the rigor and the effort with the risk and potentially the reversibility of the decisions. And Agile, not a silver bullet, but it does offer that paradigm shift to managing projects where you can iterate, right? So you can test a hypothesis, you can gain customer feedback quickly, and you can continue to improve the product. And it's to Matt's point of customer centricity. In the past, we would have said, this is what we're going to build. In a few years' time, here it is, and no one wants it. And we're not doing anyone any favors. And Matt said it's hard to push the rope. I fully agree, and I think we probably all can. Having a customer pulling the rope sure does make it nice. So, the software industry have known this for a couple of decades since the Agile Manifesto. It's really only been the past few years, admittedly, that the upstream and Chevron in particular have embraced the Agile mindset. And I don't see any reason why what the upstream view and what I'm talking about here wouldn't apply equally in the downstream. So I think the challenge before us now is how do we take the Agile approach beyond just digital strategies? And we've had some success with this. And again, we all manage high risk businesses in a high risk industry. So I'm not advocating for recklessness, and I'm definitely not advocating for throwing out our risk management practices. But I think there is a balance, and there is an opportunity to use an agile mindset as we go about our business. And we've had the most success in the upstream in our unconventional resources, where you can typically make a bit more of a modest upfront investment. You can develop a few wells, develop a few regions, get some data, and then you can start to make adjustments to your well design or better understand the subsurface, and then incorporate those changes into future investment decisions. So that may not be a fair analogy to a downstream refinery, but it's something to think about, and it's something Chevron's looking at. How do we maintain our rigorous risk management, and in this future and world, how do we apply agile principles to make the projects more effective, more efficient, more economic?
Great. And when considering to use that process, of course, the next question is who's going to actually do it? So Matt, should the digital technologies be built in-house or purchased from a vendor?
It's a difficult question, I guess. In my 30 years in refining and supply and trading business, I've seen our strategy sort of pendulum swing back and forth of, we have a penchant to build first and buy only if we have to, versus there's perfectly good commodity software out there, let's buy and only build if absolutely necessary. I think we're kind of somewhere in the middle right now, and I would say certainly in the shrinking world of refining and lower margins for longer is what it looks like. We're definitely focused on shrinking the diversity of technology that we have out there across refining, as well as trying to do more is commonality across our heritage upstream business as well. And so looking for, I guess, fewer different solutions and fewer strategic providers is definitely a push for us on the buy space, and also with the advancement of different data platforms like through Microsoft and AWS and Google. I think that we've got a lot more that we can do on our own in some of the advanced data analytics space versus maybe what we had been able to do in the past. And I think most any oil business out there has, their own internal data scientists and work in their own internal, data solutions. Once you have that democratization of the data in mind, so I think there's probably some capabilities there that are better than what we had in the past. But at the same time, there are companies out there who have been investing in that sort of data science capability for a lot longer than what we have, and have some really good, unique solutions out there that would be, silly to try and reinvent or rebuild on our own. So I guess we, will continue to have a blend, I would expect, on commercial product license versus things that we build on our own. But we're certainly being more critical around that today than what we have been in the past. And I think that certainly, in some of the more unique areas around the data science space, we're definitely looking to increase our own internal capability and do as much of that as we possibly can, and invest in our people to do that, rather than just kind of being beholden to a kind of perpetual license arrangement on all of those types of capabilities going forward.
Yeah, that's a good way to approach it. Deanna, how do you encourage your portfolio companies to adopt digital technologies?
Yeah, so I guess for the companies we work with, we don't necessarily get involved with the operational management of the company, because we're pretty focused on helping them on the transaction side. That being said, I think there's a way to set up the company for a very good future transaction, and that's kind of where we get involved, is helping them on that path. And I think there's naturally a lot of interest in digitalization. So we work with companies a lot of times, just to identify companies that they might be interested in talking to, or piloting with, or just learning more about. And I think a lot of it has to do with a lot of this drive to kind of learn more about digitalization has to do with kind of what everybody else is doing. So conferences like these, that champion best practices, or other events in which you can kind of get a look into what your peers are doing, allow, I think, these companies to fast follow and to learn best practices. And then, a lot of times it is investor driven, and we see more of that in the upstream space, because they're more PE-backed companies. But a lot of times, the sponsor will say, how about you look at this company, and oh, we've seen this practice very effectively in this company, so let's transfer it over here. So a lot of it is investor driven sometimes. And I think also a big component is kind of the culture itself. I think we have to encourage our companies to embrace change, and embrace experimentation. So if they're in the mindset where they want to just continue what they're doing and not stray from that, then that's a very difficult mindset to change. So all of it, just showing them companies and having them talk with other companies on digitalization, none of that really matters if internally you don't really have that mindset, that desire to change something. So we try to encourage just that cultural shift to enable that. Like we were talking about earlier, just the bottom line, I think operational efficiency will just be a key word for a long time to come for this industry.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely change and change management are critical components, and thank you for highlighting the aspect of knowing what other people are doing. But speaking about change, Shri, how do we bring the necessary skills to the workforce?
Yeah, digital journey is rapidly changing The technologies are changing. By the time you know something has come, something already behind it. So it is like having a platter of all the exotic desserts on your hand. Which one I pick, which one I eat, right? The follow-up question is what I wanted to do versus what I can do with the people that I have. So we need to really understand the technological barriers we have, the skills barriers that we have, or the cultural barriers we have. We talked about earlier by Deanna that cultural is a huge barriers in the industry, because you have a people spanning from millennials to the veterans, and there is a chasm in terms of the technology adaptation. And I was in a conference last year, and one of the speaker was telling she hired a new person, and the person came in with the desk with the keyboards and mouse. He never used the mouse and keyboard. He was trying to touch the screen. So we have one spectrum of millennials who never worked on the conventional. They always adopted the most, the latest and the greatest. And you have another sets of spectrum of people who only know best doing their job through wrenches and screwdrivers or other measures. Now you are giving them the tough pad and go and look into the data and make the decisions. I think there is a skill barrier, sir. So the skill barriers and coupled with the cultural barriers, and oil and gas industries never adopted that technology that easily, and there is always a shield in front of the people that, oh, I don't know what will happen if I do this. So there is a discomfort within the people because they never adopted this. So from the company's perspective, there are many things needs to happen, which is what is the value chain we want to improve, and what people I have, and what skills that we wanted to reskill. The people have, so how many people in my system can be reskilled, because reskilling is not an easy task. The data shows there are 60% of the workforce right now in oil and gas is need to be reskilled to adapt to the digital journey, and it takes about 10 months. So we have to really pick our battles, and we have to understand what part of our existing workforce can be reskilled to do what part of the value chain in the digital journey, and what portion of the resources that we wanted to bring in as an external help, like maybe artificial intelligence and machine learning. That is not the forte of a company inherently. So do you want to bring some external consulting companies to help those fill in those shoes, or reskilling yourself, or bringing the new hires? Like someone said earlier, the data science and data analytics is really a big area that we really need to learn and adopt, because that's our journey, because that's what we are foreseeing our the real-time data, and we need our in-house skills to available to evolve on a continuous journey. So this is a very interesting change, and it is the biggest struggle because we need to understand the culture. We have to break that barrier. And also, when we reskill, I think one of the biggest thing is, so far the training is always considered as a cost center. Do you really want to consider as a cost center, or do you want to make this as an investment opportunity for a digital journey? And it is a must, because by sending a video or a micro learning, the skill is not going to change. This is going to take time, and it is an investment. It is not a cost center anymore. So the adaptation has multiple facets to reskill of the people, investment approach, cultural barriers, and technology barriers, because a lot of our technologies are 30, 40 years old, and they are not interfaceable with the latest and greatest. And that means now you're talking about more capital infrastructure upgrade in order to embrace the new digital journey. So it is a pretty complex journey for oil and gas, and I think it'll take time. But the key here is, the fact is the digital journey is here, and we have to embrace and adopt.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an excellent point. I think personally the most important point in the entire journey, we need to invest not only in technology but in people, and the value to the financial bottom line that will occur at a later date, but it will occur. So let's change the discussion to the to-dos. practical? What can we actually do in the near future? So Matt, in your opinion, what particular technology has the most potential for value delivery? Matt, I believe you're muted. Okay, so I can't hear Matt. So let's progress to Shri for the time being. Shri, how can we use digital technology to predict unplanned outages?
As I mentioned earlier, the technology progression is required from two aspects, right? Like the key, if any executive, if you look in oil and gas industry, two things makes them really lose sleep. One is the process safety and health and safety. And I think that these two are the areas, the two areas that will definitely will help in addition to cost improvement and reliability and maintenance improvement, because reliability and maintenance has an impact on the overall shutting down of the unplanned outage. So when you have an unplanned outage, that means you're not only losing the money, having a flaring, it's an environmental issues. A leak is environmental issues, regulators are behind you, and a leak could be a catastrophic for people's health and safety. So one of the 2020 survey shows, the satellite data shows that the emission from the oil and gas is about 145 billion cubic meters, and it is equivalent to 200 ton of carbon footprint. So that means an unplanned outage has that level of impact. So the key is what kind of work that we wanted to embrace becomes a reality. Can we prevent an unplanned outage and plan it in a way with the information that we can have in the real time? So traditionally, if you look, you have an inspection data, you have a maintenance data, you have a process conditions, they're all worked in silos. And vibration data for the compressors, or you look into the process conditions, they all looked in different views and different dimensions from their own areas of expertise. But there was never a time that they are all combined together and brought into one central location to harness the right information to say, hey, this compressor is going out of control. Is that a process related or is that a machine related? Because the natural instinct is that the compressor itself is a problem, because traditionally the data shows 45% of the failures occurred because of the mechanical, because that is a mindset. And now change to that mindset, bringing the new learning, whether it is a deep learning or neural networking or through AI and machine learning, if we can bring the process condition variations into the reliability inspection data analysis, can we bring those data into a better predictability? So for example, corrosion is a bigger issue. A lot of the time, corrosion data are based on inspection reports based on the previous turnaround or the previous shutdown. Now, that is a 3 or 4 year old, but now your feedstock might have changed or other conditions might have changed. So your corrosion rate have accelerated higher than what has been typically anticipated. So is that knowledge, is information is available? Probably not. When that information is not available, what is going to happen is you're going to have an unplanned leak or unplanned trip in the system that is going to shut out and causing all the repercussion risk associated with that. I think the digital journey is going to help us to bring all of those into one basket, one central pool of information used by different domain knowledge to predict what that outcome looks like. And then they can come together to say, hey, 3 months from now, I think this pipe is thinned out to the point that is beyond repairs, and can we plan an outage? Now this gives the executives to plan their journey, because now they can manage the back end and the front end in the market to manage their planned outage. I think this is becoming a very critical journey from that aspect.
Definitely. Thank you for that point of view. Matt, I presume your microphone is back. The question was, what technology has the most potential for value delivery?
Yeah, well, first of all, would be a headset that has a battery life of more than about 6 hours, because I finally, after back-to-back meetings, it's finally died on me. So, but after that, I would say anything, and Patrick, you mentioned this before around the democratization of data, and the need to kind of get your data organized and coordinated into a way to make better use of it. And really after that, then it would be things that digitize the work process. Ben made reference before about engineering happiness into the organization, and really that happiness for us will come with ways that we can streamline all of the connectivity of data across our legacy systems and bring a much simpler and straight through process on all of our work processes. I mean, most of the refining entities out there are really kind of brownfield digital implementation sites. Our newest refinery in BP was built in 1976, and so we've got all sorts of heritage legacy systems out there that we can't just kind of rip out and replace very easily. So things that can enable us to take the data from those disparate systems, from those disparate work processes, and string it all together so that it becomes a straight through without the end user really recognizing that there's been no real change back in the legacy source data systems. And really for us, that comes through in use of things like Salesforce or Microsoft Power Apps and just things that enable us to get a much better user interface and a much cleaner approach toward our processes, as well as in the post-COVID world, recognition that we need to be able to get visibility of those processes and visibility of that data outside of the refinery fence line, and enabling the workforce to really be able to work from anywhere and be play their part in whatever the critical process that is that they are supporting, but play it in a much more streamlined and potentially work from anywhere type of a mode.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. It sounds like Shri and Matt agree that we need to combine the various data silos into the famous one version of the truth and make it available to everybody in a convenient way. That is certainly still a challenge in the downstream sector. And Ben, what is the impact of digital on decision making and the business outcomes?
So I'll just add that is a humongous challenge in the upstream sector as well. And it probably goes without saying that digital can't be of any value if it's not impacting business outcomes. Sri touched on this right at the beginning. Deanna talked about changes trickling down to the bottom line with things like HSE, OPEX, uptime, wastage, etc. So if you think about any of our jobs, and not to diminish or criticize what we do, but all we really do is make decisions. So it doesn't matter if you're asking what drilling parameters should I use, what conditions do I need to operate a distillation column at, how do I handle this disruption? Like everything we do all day in all of our jobs is making decisions. So I would propose that business outcomes are in fact nothing more than the consequence of decision making, either good or bad. And historically, we've had to trade off. So you can either have high quality decisions or efficient decisions. You can easily and quickly make a bad decision, or it's somewhat straightforward to make a really good decision if you have unlimited time and resources. So the impact of digital on decision making is to be able to have both, so better and faster decisions. And Sri was talking about this just a minute ago with all the different data sources coming together and integrating them for deeper insights. And that's the future. It's this abundant and world that we're living in. And I think it's exciting to see our workplace transform the way that our personal lives have. And it effectively, for the first time in history, I would argue, we really can have our cake and eat it too.
Oh, that's fantastic. I always wanted to eat the cake and still have it. Deanna, where do you see the opportunities and the gaps at the current moment in the downstream sector?
Yeah, I think the cost saving part of the equation still has plenty of runway left. I think there's lots of opportunities to implement best practices for digitalization in downstream. And we were talking about outages earlier. I think we saw a really good example of that in the winter storm here in Texas 2 weeks ago, in which I think you could say arguably predictive maintenance could have prevented a lot of the failures that had happened. And even when they were implemented, kind of to the point of what's the impact of digital on decision making, there were models before the winter storm that told us that a lot of this equipment would fail. So it's about listening to those models and having a culture of actually acting on them. So I still think there's plenty of opportunities for that part of the equation, is just saving money and becoming more efficient. I think the ESG side of things is really interesting, and how that sort of plays into digitalization for downstream, because we're seeing a lot of refiners now convert their refineries into producing renewable diesel, and that's a big change. And I don't really hear much about how digitalization will play a role in this. It seems like to me that with renewable diesel, and how many different feedstocks go into it, and how much it's blended into other products, that would require more precision and more process control in general. So I think we'll see if that actually manifests, if that becomes a tailwind for digitalization. But I think overall, as ESG and energy transition becomes more a part of these companies' narratives, I think that'll trickle down to having more visibility on the value chain, having more visibility on each component of the carbon footprint, and really educating the consumer too on what goes into each of these products that we're selling to them. Because I know, we've done this thought experiment before about, whether or not consumers will pay the green premium for fuels, and I think the result of that was, consumers don't really care; they just want a lower cost fuel. But what we're finding this time is that consumers are paying for sustainability, are paying the green premium, and that'll just continue over time, I think, with the generational change. So how can our industry educate our consumers around where their fuel's coming from and what goes into it? I think as that question becomes clearer and becomes more part of the conversation, I think refiners and other downstream players will have to think more about how they can use digital, and they can use things like mobile apps or marketplaces to kind of help educate the consumer around all of this.
Thank you, Deanna, and we're finishing right on time. So thank you very much to all the panelists. Thank you very much to the audience for listening to our viewpoints. I think, and I hope I speak for everybody on the panel to say that we're reachable. If you have any questions to us, please reach out. I myself, I'm reachable on LinkedIn very easily. That's probably true for everybody else. So again, thank you very much, and see you next time.